Illinois University. Um, we also have the Mentorship and Scholarship Program, which is our flagship program. And that one is one-on-one college educated mentors paired with high school students who are currently in care. Students earn $100 towards scholarship each time they meet with their mentor. And it's really cool because that scholarship money can be used for paying for school. It can be used to get school supplies. It can be used to buy food. We've had students who've utilized the money to take care of basic needs and then other major needs, such as, they need new tires or their car broke down. So every time they meet with this mentor, that goes into an account for them, and then they're able to request whatever dollar amount money they need to be able to support themselves. So right now we're primarily in the Chicagoland area. We are expanding to other cities in Illinois just to make sure that we're covering as many of the gaps as we can in providing that care to youth in care. Mentors go through extensive training in how to best show up for these students, trauma-informed training, and things like that. So we're gonna hop into just, you know, the foster care experience and process. So for those who may not be familiar, the Department of Children and Family Services, protects students, young people who are reported to be abused or neglected, and increase their family's capacity to care for them. They work to provide for the well-being of children in care. They provide appropriate permanent families as quickly as possible for those who are removed from their homes and cannot safely return home at this time. They work towards early intervention and child abuse prevention training, and they work in partnership with communities to fulfill this mission. So in Illinois, there are about 21,000 children in foster care. Um, you know, across the whole age range. So it's pretty spread out. Ultimately, of course, the goal is to get as many of these students, young people, reunified with their families, but that doesn't always happen. So let's go through the foster care experience. So how a family becomes involved with the Department of Children and Family Services is there's usually a hotline call. Those calls can come from anyone, teachers, neighbors, whoever may notice neglect or abuse. And this is what's supposed to happen. Now, it doesn't always happen like this. So there's a hotline call. After that hotline call, there should be an investigation into the accusation or the experience. If necessary, that child is then removed from the home and placed into foster care. Um, during that placement, court happened. That's where families go to court regarding, the accusation, what happened. And ideally, there's reunification efforts to bring that student, that child back to their homes or another permanent placement. So, in real life, what typically tends to happen, there are a lot of hotline calls. Investigations don't always happen after that first call. Removal doesn't always happen after that first call. Typically, there's several, um, you know, hotline calls reporting a family or an experience or something like that, which then typically leads to an investigation, removal, placement, but placements don't always permanent. Unfortunately, a lot of our young people are moved from home to home to home. There's several court cases where oftentimes the young person may not have an advocate dedicated just to them. They could be sent home temporarily. They could be removed again. There's court, and then some form of permanency does happen. Whether that permanency is, remaining in foster care, being adopted, returning home. At some point, if permanency does not happen in terms of placed in a long-term foster care home, adopted, a lot of young people do just age out of foster care, which means they've spent many years between homes and things like that until they become of age. And so a lot of our students experience just multiple levels of marginalization. So being in foster care is obviously already one level. Being in foster care means you don't have a stable home. You are separated from your primary and your first caregivers, and you may not be in a place where you receive those same type of bonds again. In addition to that, a lot of our students experience racism homelessness, early parenthood. Young people who have been in foster care are more likely to have early pregnancies, incarceration. They may be on IEPs and need to receive special education services, experience poverty. They may be from the LGBTQIA community. They could be the first in their family to attend college if they make it there, and as well as just varying levels of poverty. So 28,000 students, youth age out of foster care each year in the US. And so that's between ages 18 to 21. In Illinois, though, what we found in 2011 is that we did have the highest rate of young people aging out of care. And as a reminder, to age out, that means you were not reunified with your family, you were not adopted, or placed in long term kinship care. And so in 2011, around 50% of youth in Illinois exited foster care just through aging out, which means from the time they entered care, removed from their family, they bounced around foster homes, they were in group homes, things like that. And so they never returned to any or experienced any, stability and support that comes with being in a permanent home. And so there are, some pretty dire outcomes for young people who've experienced foster care who age out. So 31% of those young people do experience being unhoused, 50% experience chronic unemployment, and 57% do become incarcerated. So, the screen. So there's, obviously varying levels of financial instability. Um, you can see the chart here. 70%, 6% use public assistance, economic hardship. 27% report not being able to pay their rent. 13% have had their electricity cut off. 28%, have their phones disconnected, things like that. And having worked in this space for the last several years, we've seen and supported students through all of these, which is why programs like this and other programs throughout the state and throughout the country who support these young people really try to target helping them overcome these particular challenges so that they can focus on being employed and completing school and things like that. So, about 90% of young people who have never been in foster care will graduate high school, versus 50% who have ever been in foster care will graduate high school. Only 10% of foster youth do go on to enroll in get their bachelor's degree, and that's versus 68% of young people who have never been in foster care. And about 3% do complete a bachelor degree compared to 34%. I will say there is research coming out that indicates that that number is a little higher, that 3%. So right now they say it's between 4 and 7, but on average we're kind of still hovering around there as the general population's degree attainment continues to rise. So, youth from foster care, 86% say that they actually do want to attend college versus how many are able to get that degree. So as you can see, compared to all other marginalized demographics, those, especially with those with intersectional identities, being in foster care does have very significant repercussions for, for long-term degree attainment. So the FAFSA is obviously incredibly important. And a lot of young people who do go ahead and fill that out have that support, whether it's from their schools or their families. The thing about being in foster care is you're typically changing schools, so you don't have an opportunity to get to know your college counselors. You may not be there long enough to get into that pipeline of that college preparation. If you don't fill out that FAFSA, you actually do not have access to federal funds. You do not have access to support from the Department of Children and Family Services. And so one of the things that we do is help young people get that FAFSA, you know, filled out. So there are a lot of barriers to foster youth pursuing higher education. One is burdensome documentation. If you're moving from home to home, oftentimes it is very difficult to keep track of your birth certificate and your school records and your social security number, especially if you're a child, right? If you have started this journey as a very young person, trying to keep up with all these documents that we oftentimes take for granted does present a barrier. And if that document is lost, it becomes very difficult to obtain a copy of your birth certificate or get a copy of your social security card. That's only compounded by a lack of caring adults and family ties. I know growing up, I did not keep my own birth certificate or social security card until well into adulthood because I was afraid I would lose it. And my grandparents had those documents, well into adulthood, right? As a young person, I can't imagine how difficult it is trying to keep up with everything, keep track of dates and everything without that support of a caring adult in your life. And unfortunately, foster youth face a lot of stigma. Once people hear that they've been in foster care, they automatically assign very specific narratives to what this young person might be capable of, what that experience is. And I'm sure we all know that when you're encountering these biases, it does make it very hard to just complete your goals and kind of navigate complex and challenging systems. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of our young people do experience housing insecurities. If your basic needs are not met, it's very difficult to enroll in college and it's very difficult to study and do well in college. And then, as well as, educational deficits. If you've moved schools several times throughout elementary, middle, and high school, it's very difficult to have a continuous and cohesive educational experiences, which means you may be entering the higher education world uh, behind your peers who had more stable homes and more access to support programs and things like that. As we talked about early parenthood, as I'm sure we can all imagine, it is hard to complete your degree and parent at the same time. There's that financial instability. Even if you do have some grants and scholarships, the cost of living is very high, and oftentimes it does not cover all of one's basic needs, especially while being a student when you're expected to spend most of your time studying. Our students don't typically have that privilege to where they don't have to work while in school and can fully dedicate their lives to studying. A lot of our young people also experience complex medical issues, especially if they haven't had access to consistent doctors and checkups and things like that. As you can imagine, being separated from your birth family can take an emotional, mental toll. And so a lot of our young people need ongoing mental and emotional support. And then, of course, all of this, you bring it together, that is quite a bit of trauma. And navigating the higher education landscape while also trying to navigate and overcome that trauma is just another barrier to that pursuit of higher education. So there's been a lot of discourse now about if college is worth it. And here at Foster Progress, we do believe that a college degree is absolutely worth it. And that's not to say trade schools are not important and the trades are not important. They obviously are. But an individual with a bachelor's degree will earn 84% more than someone with a high school degree only over the course of our lifetime. And because so many of our young people have already had a challenging start, we want to give them all the tools to be able to overcome those challenges. And we really believe that that bachelor's degree is 100% worth it. So this is just kind of a chart to kind of show where students who don't have that degree, the different earning potentials of those degrees, just so we know to really emphasize the importance of getting that college degree. And just another chart about just we really advocate the importance of getting that bachelor's degree or higher. What's going on here? All right. So, how do we go about creating these pathways for youth in care? So, the first thing, providing information and connections to youth, their caregivers, and their child care workers early and frequently. As I work with more young people who have been in care, the common kind of through line that I see is that growing up in care, they didn't know anything about college, that process, how it could be accessible to them. Um, and so it's really important that those who work with young people are constantly talking to them about the various pathways and the supports available to help them get to that college degree. Um, Another one is creating a culture of post-secondary education and training and normalizing this experience. Um, Young people need support in like organizing their documents and knowing their options. We've noticed that a lot of our young people who have been in care go into social work because that's been their experience. They've experienced social workers. So many of them don't know really what majors are available and how to prepare for them. Um, we host a lot of financial aid workshops starting off when they're in high school so that when that FAFSA comes up, they're not surprised. So that's really important that those early high school years, we're giving them that language and those tools to be able to understand the importance and the need of FAFSA, what financial aid is, and then as much as possible, supporting them socially, helping with living arrangements, things like that. And then as they're progressing through their higher education, developing a plan and help them execute it. So, a lot of, I remember a story of one of our students who was moving to the dorms by herself. She took a bus there and she was just so overwhelmed with how this all works, what she's supposed to be doing. She's watching all these other young people with their families moving things in, and literally all she had was the clothes she had when she got to her last foster care placement and when she left. And that, she says, was a very difficult way to start that experience. She was just thrown in, did not have a plan, did not know how to study, did not understand syllabi and things like that. And so, for those of us who do work with young people in care experience, sometimes we have to share things that we might think might be obvious and help them plan for things that we may think is just, you know, um, common knowledge and things like that. But a lot of our young people did not have common experiences, and so we cannot expect that they just know the same things that we do. And it also requires quite a bit of grace and compassion to ensure that they're able to be successful. And so for those of us who do this work, we are the gatekeepers of opportunity. We should just be sharing far and wide. If we hear about a resource, even if we're not sure if it applies to them or a program or something, share it. We have to remain hopeful. Oftentimes, our young people will surprise us. We've had students who have had difficult semesters, two difficult semesters, fear that they may have to drop out or anything like that. But we just have to keep encouraging them and remember that they are overcoming some very difficult circumstances, ones that many of us have never encountered, our families have not encountered. And so we just have to continue to be there for them and cheer them on. Um, our words do matter. So how we talk to them, how we talk about them, the way we show up for them, the way we give feedback, all of that is very important. Um, and then, yeah, just as much as possible, just help them with the practicalities of life. Um, Accessing on campus resources such as like food kitchen and like places to get clothing and accessing the health center and the mental health center and things like that. A lot of times, young people are nervous to go through some of these experiences alone because they've never been. And so, where possible, be an advocate, show up with them, for them, just to help them through. So, what are some of the financial aid options for foster youth? So this is where it gets a bit technical, and some of these things do change frequently. So if you are interested and this is in your field or purview, I would just suggest staying up to date on the DCFS website. DCFS also offers some trainings and some informational webinars on just how FAFSA or how financial aid is distributed through them, the requirements, and things like that. So students who were in foster care after age 13 will fill out the FAFSA as independents. That's really important. This will give them the maximum access to financial resources available, like the Pell Grant and the MAP Grant. So for this to work, if the student's been accepted, the school will need additional information, proof of wardship so that they've been in state care, and then an IRS verification of non-filing, which means they've never filed taxes before. And so that proof of wardship comes from their caseworker, and they have to have that ASAP. If they're going to get any of those funds, they need that letter. We emphasize this because this has held up our students in the past. And then that FAFSA gives them access to DCFS's post-secondary programs. And so those are various programs that come directly from, Illinois DCFS. So there's the DCFS Youth and Scholarship Program. And so this is a tuition waiver, and it can only be used at Illinois public schools. They are legally bound to honor that for undergrad. Some young people have tried at private schools, but they are not legally required to honor that. So it does not cover room and board though, but it does include a monthly stipend as well as a medical insurance card. Now, students who decide to go to private school or go out of state, they will still get that monthly stipend. They just won't get that tuition waiver. Now, some schools may honor it, but typically they do not. And so that tuition and fee waivers, if the student is not selected for the scholarship, so the scholarship program, you do have to apply. It varies how many young people get it each year. There was one year where every student in Illinois who applied did get it. And then thankfully more young people are going to college who are in care. It is a bit more competitive. And so we always let our youth know, apply and apply early. You may or may not get it, but if they don't get that youth and scholarship, they can still take advantage of the tuition waiver, which is also only be able to be used at a public school. Again, it does not cover room and board. They do not get that monthly stipend. But any youth who's ever been in foster care are eligible unless they were returned back home. So they were returned to their family, returned home. They actually do not qualify for that tuition waiver. So there's also the ETV. Now, it is administered by DCFS here in Illinois, but it is a federal program. The amount varies. It's up to $5,000 annually, but typically students do not get that much. It's kind of applied after all other grants and things like that are applied, like including their Pell Grants and things like that. It is only for students who are either still in care or left care after the age of 16. There's also youth in college. Now, this is considered a placement. So similarly to like if a young person was placed in a foster home, if they get the youth in college, that is their placement. Their placement then becomes college. So you have to leave your previous foster home to receive youth in college to get any of this benefit. And it does include a monthly stipend, and you are expected to use this towards room and board. So if you get youth in college, now you still have that tuition fee waiver. Youth in college is additional, but this one is meant to cover your room and board. A lot of young people don't know that the youth in college is a placement and meant to cover room and board. And so we're working on better disseminating that information, helping our young people understand all the different placements. It's definitely confusing for them, as it is for many of us who are navigating the different DCFS programs. So this is just kind of to see how those things overlap. So youth in college must be in care. Youth in scholarship is for any youth who's ever experienced care. And then there's that tuition waiver. And so like I said, the youth and scholarship overlaps with both. And then, youth in college, you can't be living at your previous foster home. That's how you get that room and board money. And then you can get the tuition waiver while not getting the youth and scholarship, but that means you don't get that monthly stipend, but you're also not responsible for your tuition at a public school. And then, of course, there's also ETV, which is a federal program but administered through DCFS. So, to help anyone really, but primarily our students really understand all these different programs and how you qualify, because like I said, there's a lot of nuance here, whether you left care after 13 but before 16, or were adopted if you're living on campus. So this is actually our kind of financial aid guide. It is available on our website. So if this is helpful for anyone, I'm happy to send it to you, or you can check out the website. But it kind of goes over all of the foster care options, how you qualify, and things like that. And then this is just kind of an overview of how much tuition is, and then how they break it down. So, some of this is only like you only get uh the tuition waiver is waived after like the MAP grant and the Pell grant. So there's not a set amount for the tuition waiver. It basically comes in and waive whatever's left over after your other grants. And so share some resources. If this is helpful for anyone, to screenshot this. You have the financial aid. If you're working with youth with care experience, there's a college checklist to help them get ready. And then if you do know any young people in your life who are in high school, who have been in foster care and would benefit from one-on-one mentoring, they are welcome to apply to the mentoring program. So I'll leave this up here for a second so you can screenshot it. And then, of course, feel free to stay in touch with us. We would love to keep in touch and provide any support that we can. And that is all I have for you. So if there's any questions, please let me know.
I have a question.
Yeah.
For students who are going to college, do you all like put together like trunk parties or collective stuff for like a trunk party for them so that they have resources?
Yes, so every year we have a big celebration for students in the program who are going to college. We basically have a big party. They can invite their care workers, their foster parents, things like that. And then we let them make a list of college essentials that they need. And then they're able to receive it at this party. And it could be anything: dorm supplies, clothes, things like that, to ensure that they have those basic necessities they need when starting college.
And for students that have a good relationship with their foster parents,
Mhm.
once they go off to college and they decide to, I forgot what the stipend was called, where um they get it for the school instead of um like when they're with their foster parent.
The youth in college, yeah.
Yeah. Um, could they still have a relationship if the foster parents were really good support and cheerleaders for them, would they be able to still keep in contact with them
Yeah, absolutely. That
at the school?
that becomes a choice that they get to make. What we have found is a lot of young people who are in the youth in college, which means they're receiving that money for room and board at college. A lot of them will still go home to their previous foster families during breaks and things like that. So many of them, if they have that good relationship, will continue that relationship.
Oh, that's great.
Hmm.
If you all have any questions, please write them in the chat or the Q&A. I don't see any right now. This was a great presentation. I've learned quite a bit. I did share your website in the chat for everyone.
Awesome. Also drop my email in case any questions come up after the chat. Happy to answer any questions that may spring up later on, or if you encounter a student who's been in care and you want to direct them somewhere or need some additional support, please let me know.
I have another question. Is it easy for students to access the information? I'm assuming that through their social worker, they can get a lot of information in regards to the scholarships, but you had mentioned that the document that they need from court is something that they could get from their social worker. Is that a difficult document to receive? Like, do they have to plan for it maybe a month in advance because it takes a while for them to get it, or is it something that they could quickly request and get?
It should be pretty straightforward. What we've learned is that because a lot of this it can be pretty complex and um, caseworkers aren't always aware of the various complexities that comes with applying to college and things like that. And so I do know that on DCFS's part, there are efforts being made to better disseminate the information, not only to caseworkers, but to students who are in high school. So I guess the easiest answer is it should be straightforward. And now there's definitely major efforts to like help streamline this information. There's a lot of information, um, you know, towards college and how to apply and FAFSA. And so, yeah.
And then for students that that go to school, like you mentioned the example of the student that went on her own and saw the other students getting their support. Are they familiar with other support systems? Like we have a first generation network that
Mhm.
students can sign up for that has meetups so that, if they're the first in their family, they can get a little bit more support. Do you provide those types of resources for them so that they have? And then what other resources can one think of putting together for them once they go to college? Because when you said that, I was like, the first thing that came to mind is I would put a list together of food pantries within the college dorm or what resources are available on that college for just within that campus. And then what are the nearest thrift stores or other places where nonprofits that can help a student with, things like that.
Yeah. So the YCAP program, the program that I manage, is a DCFS program, and so for the campuses that we're on, the students who've ever been in care in Illinois get that email like, hey, here's a program you could sign up for, and then we do a lot of what you mentioned, right? We connect them with a peer advocate who can help them with the campus resources. They'll help them with grocery shopping. They'll go with them to the mental health, all of that. But as you're highlighting, if it's a campus that doesn't have a resource like that, right, what do? That's where the house liaison should come in. Um, but as a house liaison, typically you have another job, like an actual, position, and then the house liaison is kind of added on to that, so it can be very difficult, to support students in that way. So that's something that's definitely I know that we are offering training to house liaisons and things like that on working with youth with foster care experience because a lot of them actually haven't worked specifically with foster youth before. And so and then you also have the issue there's some students who don't want to identify as having been in foster care. Understandably, right? It's definitely stigmatized, although it shouldn't be a place of shame, but understanding you're a young person. And so that's, I think, one thing that we emphasize is that reaching out to students who have identified themselves becomes so important because we've noticed there's a lot of anxiety of going to ask, to go to someone and say, I don't have food, right? Can be very difficult for an 18-year-old to do, right? And so we encourage people, like, if your office does have access to that data, um, of, young people who have marked on their FAFSA that they have ever been in care, reach out. Let them know, hey, welcome to campus. If you need any resources, please let me know. Just to get you started, here are some resources that we send to students, not foster students, that we send to students who are new to campus that may be beneficial. If you need something else, let me know. And so, it's not one of those things where you can just, I tell people, don't expect that they're going to come looking for you, right? This is the first time in their life where they've been in a place that has this type of level of resources. When you get to campus, the resources are abundant, so much so that you might not know to even look for them. You don't know what you don't know. So I tell people, if you do become aware of, a young person or a program who may have the access, be proactive. And so that's why on the campuses that YCAP is able to be on, we send a ton of emails. And usually it takes 3 or 4 emails before they do come, because they're skeptical. What's this program? A lot of things have let me down in the past. Is this actually going to work? So it's like being proactive and then being very frequent. And then, yeah, and if you have that list of resources ready, that's great. We also have resource guides that we put together and try to update every year, of like where that mental health office is and where the food pantry is. And I don't know they're on the website, but if you were to email me, I can also show you what it is that we put together for them.
Is YCAP in the 12 public universities and most of the community colleges?
No, we're still pretty new. We're finishing up our 3rd year. Um, and so we're only on around 8 campuses. So each YCAP program kind of functions as its own like mini org, and so you gotta slowly expand when you're trying to be on every campus. And so students in our program, we do tell them, here are the schools that have YCAP, but there are other schools that have some cool programs. So Governor State has the ACE program, so achieving um, uh, excellence education. I think that's proper. But anyway, they have a lot of resources for youth who have been in care. And it's also a smaller campus, so they actually get a lot of support. I always encourage young people, and we're partnered with them too. But they also have their own program, so not every student joins LICAP. And so there are EIU has the Village Project. UIUC has the Village Project as well, and that program was started by Dr. Trevor Hampton Campbell. And that one is, they have monthly events, like kind of like family style events, to kind of create this community. And then from there, the facilitators are able to like connect them with resources and like see if there's any issues that are coming up that might be beneficial, that they can support, things like that. So there are schools who also have other programs. But again, if you don't know, you don't know. They can be hard to find, right? But I will say, the Village Project at EIU and UIUC, and then these program at Governor States are two that come to mind in addition to YCAP.
All great information. And as you were sharing that these are things that may be universal, I was thinking the whole thrifting and budgeting thing is universal to all students as they're transitioning into adulting, which
Absolutely.
is
Yeah.
still difficult for everyone, but it is still something
Mhm.
that is a great resource just for all students to be able to pinch their pennies and figure out how to extend the dollar that they get in financial aid or any way through work or whatever, so that they can have access to these additional resources and as they transition into this adult part of their life.
Absolutely.
Mm.
100%.
Well, thank you. I don't see any questions. You answered all of mine, so I'm glad that I was able to ask those questions.
Awesome. Well, like I said, I put my email in there, and so if anything else comes up, please let me know.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye bye.